to look at those links if you're able to and willing. And I posed the question to Jeff about to define what is organic gardening and to also kind of provide some insight into why organic gardening might be a route that a beginner farmer might want to take in getting started.
Great. Well, most people understand organic gardening is the method of growing things, anything, without the use of basically petrochemical inputs, which are typically used for fertilizers, for insect management, for disease management, for weed management. And that's actually a very small piece of organic agriculture. The more important piece is, and it's a piece that actually helps to manage those four things I listed, is the life of the soil, a living soil. Through proper management of the soil, you can actually control those four things by maintaining a living soil with a complex soil biotic web, soil food web, through crop rotations, through organic matter management. It's a living organism. It's an organism that needs fed. And Mother Nature does a very good job of feeding it. We usually just get in the way of that. And we can actually enhance that, as that we've learned. So that's in a nutshell organic agriculture, but it also has a social and environmental aspect to it, and financial one too. Actually, it's quite profitable, and it's environmentally sound, and it speaks to our relationship to the land, which also has a relationship to the community.
Absolutely.
So.
There has been some controversy over organic labeling in recent years that I'm sure a lot of us have seen. What do you have to say about that? Is that justified, or do you feel like that is something that should be talked about?
I've never understood why total transparency of what a farmer is doing or not doing to the consumer, the ultimate end place for any product we produce, is not readily available on the label. Much of the discussion has been around, I hate to use the word conventional, but high input producers who want to resist their food being labeled anything but sustainable also.
Right.
Transparency, I'm a big advocate of that.
Absolutely.
And there are people who have serious health issues related to the use of pesticides and also just fertilizers.
Sure.
And they're very sensitive to these things. So I think those people who have medical disadvantages they have the right to know that this stuff is present in food.
Sure. All right. So now that we've unpacked a little bit of what is organic gardening, can you kind of describe a little bit more about why someone might want to get into it?
Well, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's healthy and it's clean. Now, I want to make sure people understand there's improper ways to apply organic agriculture. You can be a polluter with the use of manures versus compost, as much as people think just manure is part of what organic agriculture is, but it's not just manure, it's how we process the manure into a stable humus and compost that has a slow release of nutrients. It's very affordable. You don't really need much more than a strong back and the power of observation and a desire for clean food. And seed is really all the inputs you need in most systems.
Okay.
So sweat equity and seed.
Yep. All right. So now that we have kind of unpacked the what and how, we are going to go to a little video. Our educational director, April Hoy, helped us make this video earlier this week, and it's going to kind of take us through the gardens at Stratford Ecological Center, explain a little bit more about pests, a little bit more about composting, things like that. And we're only going to touch the kind of the surface of a lot of different topics. So as we're going through this video, if there's something that catches your attention, feel free to send us a question and we'll be able to answer that throughout that video. And then we'll talk about it further on during our Q&A session. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer to that video now.
My name is April Hoy. I'm the Education Director here at Stratford Ecological Center, and I want to welcome you to our garden segment. of our Beginning Farmer series. Today we're going to be discussing gardening out in an outdoor garden using raised beds and in-ground beds, and also gardening in the greenhouse. I have been at Stratford on staff for almost 13 years now, but I got my start gardening when I was very little with my parents. We had a small family farm. My dad raised sheep and horses, chickens, all of that, and we had a very large vegetable garden that we pretty much ate out of all the time. It sustained our family. And when I was little, I was always given my own space to garden, and I could grow anything I wanted. So that was really what tied me in. Sometimes when we would go out to the large family garden, it was more work, and it wasn't as I didn't enjoy it as much as my own little plot. So as an adult, I continued my love of plants. And gardening really, it started with native plants a lot. I felt a real connection there and enjoyed the pollinators and everything, and just went from there. So today I would like to share some of the fundamentals with you of what I have learned over the years. I've read a lot of books and had a lot of resources, especially here at Stratford. We're surrounded by very knowledgeable people. But I would say one of the things that has taught me the most is my own sense of observation and paying attention, understanding what good soil looks like, feels like, smells like. Every morning I get up and I walk my yard at home. I walk the gardens at Stratford, and I just see what's happening there. I notice if plants are starting to become green. For example, we planted some squash plants in the garden. Immediately we had pest issues, which was really early for a typical season. And I kind of picked off some of those leaves. We applied diatomaceous earth, and every day I go back to see how the plants are responding. And they're coming healthy start, so they're coming back. So that power of observation and paying attention can be your biggest teacher. We're working with a fluid and fluctuating environment of combination of soil, water, sunlight, and air, and all of the living things in the whole web of life that rely on those elements to live. I wanted to bring you to our compost pile at Stratford. As you've probably heard with Jeff, our farmer, and our other talks, soil is really the foundation of the farm, the garden. It's where everything happens. So within our compost pile, we are recycling. We take the lessons of nature, and we're recycling the nutrients of organic matter back into our garden. And good, healthy soil is full of life. We have microorganisms, fungus, bacteria, worms, all kinds of things living together. And it goes back to understanding that web of life. When we're taking care of our plants, we have to understand what our plants need to live, but we also really have to take care of our soil and make sure we know what our healthy living soils need to continue to live. Without the fungus and the mycelium thriving and living, we have certain nutrients that are not available to our plants. So we're really farming soil in a way and protecting it. And the ways that we do that, well, one, compost, very fundamental process that we can utilize to create healthy soil for our gardens, replenishing that topsoil. We also can use cover crops, mulching, and those types of things to protect our soils And a good, healthy, fertile soil will not just add nutrients to your vegetables and garden plants that you need, but it also protects from erosion. You'll notice in the garden when you water, a healthy soil will seep the water down into the garden, which really helps your plants get that really good drink of water instead of hitting the top and running off. So it penetrates, and it also helps with good air circulation. Air and oxygen is fundamental to all of those living things in the soil and your living plant within that to grow and live. Taking care of not just a tomato plant, but billions of life forms when you are gardening organically and healthy. And to have healthy vegetable plants, we need to be aware of water and air, and sunlight, obviously. In your garden plan, you want to look at that. But cultivation, tilling, healthy soils really help take care of that plant. All right, well, we are at our strawberry patch. We have two different varieties of strawberries here. We have an everbearing and a summer-bearing strawberry. These strawberries have been in this location probably about 8 years. And a lot of people recommend when you're growing strawberries to move them to a new location every few years. It helps, break disease cycle with soil fertility, all of that stuff. But I have not done that. And I think the trick and what I'm finding with keeping the strawberries here is the regular application of new compost in healthy soils. So we compost these strawberry beds pretty thickly in the early spring. Sometimes we'll compost in the fall, but most of the times we just cover it with straw to protect the strawberries, and that straw will break down and add more organic matter to the soil as well. But we compost early spring, and the strawberries do really well. We do use a mixture of manure, animal compost, and a mixture of compost made from plant material. Those two different composts can bring different nutrients, micronutrients, and elements to the soil. So the more diverse your compost is, the more nutrients and diversity you have within your soils, which create a healthier balance. So we're always looking for a balance. There we planted some peppers up in our giving garden, and the soil was kind of wet. We have clay soil there. So we filled our holes with compost, the animal compost. And one, it was a really harsh environment there. And two, just that straight compost was too much for the peppers transitioning from being in small containers to out in the main garden. So through my observation, I figured out what was happening, and I mixed in topsoil and in with that fresh compost, and now they're doing great. To share a little bit about how we got our plants started here in our garden. We started tomato plants by seed in our little greenhouse, what we call it, our nursery greenhouse. Oh, I'm trying to remember when. We started probably about 10 weeks before frost-free date when we want to get them out. Tomatoes, as you know, with peppers, eggplant, okra, those types of things, they love warm weather. So these are a plant you do not want to put out until you know there's absolutely no chance of frost. If you do, you can cover them. Some people cover them, they want to get them started, but we're lucky to have the greenhouse facilities to be able to get them started and kind of big before we get them out here. And the reason we like to get them big is it gives us a prolonged season of tomatoes. Already these tomatoes are developing some fruit. Now, when we first put them out here, they did experience some transplant shock. They kind of didn't look really good, but as you can see, they're coming back. And this is a testament to having a really healthy start as a seedling. The healthier the plant is, the better it can withstand environmental factors, either transplant shock, pest, drought, whatever's happening. The healthier it is, the better it will withstand that. So as you can see, these look very healthy and green. We covered our soil with straw as a mulch. The mulch is going to, one, protect the soil. It's not exposed to the sun. It keeps it cool. It minimizes the weeds here, and it helps with moisture regulation. So on a hot, sunny day like today, all of our water is not evaporating. Now, when we water, we like to water early morning or in the evening to reduce evaporation. And when you water, you don't want to, sometimes we'll have interns come and we tell them to water the garden and they're just spraying all over. On a hot summer day, even if you water in the morning, it's good to avoid getting the leaves wet. I take the garden nozzle and I hold it all the way down here. We're watering the base of the plant at the roots. And I always tell the interns as well, it's better to water really deep, less frequently than frequent shallow waterings. That deep watering will help the roots develop down. If you're just doing a shallow water on the surface, your roots are going to seek that water and they're going to be very shallow on the surface. So we want really healthy, big roots. So good deep watering is really essential. And then also we come through and we cultivate. And you can see this soil is still moist. I watered yesterday morning and it's still moist. It's really nice, crumbly. You can see the structure of the soil, the aggregates. It looks beautiful. That's a wonderful structure right there. So within that, you can see the air that can move, the water that can move, and all of that is going to benefit our tomato plant to grow. But we'll go through and cultivate a little bit. And we will enjoy beautiful summer tomatoes. Okay, I want to bring you out to our squash bed to talk about pests a little bit. I spoke earlier about we planted this bed and we noticed they were little cucumber beetles came in and started eating our leaves. So one, I kind of went through and dusted them off, picked off some of the leaves that were really damaged. And the reason I do that is because I don't want the plant to continue to put energy into this leaf. I want them to focus the energy on the healthy leaves that are doing well. And you can see these all looked like this. And these look beautiful and wonderful now. So why are the pests here? Well, our plants are really good food for them. And they love it. So what can we do to change their mind? Well, not much, but there's one plant. This is a nasturtium, and it's not in flower right now, but when it is in flower, it is very similar to a squash flower. In the actual texture of it, some of the colors, it can have a red, orange, yellow color. But When the bugs come and eat that flower, it has a really spicy, peppery taste that they don't like. So they'll think, oh, this isn't good, and leave the area. So ideally, we would have a lot of nasturtium here. We would have marigolds and different plants that can either repel pests, or we want to plant things that bring in our predator insects. So we can have native plants such as our echinacea, asters, different sources of food for all of our predator plants or predator insects to come in. So those plants will draw insects to them. The predators come and eat them. So once again, it's a good balance. We did put diatomaceous earth around our squash plants as well. Diatomaceous earth is ground up shells that when the bugs ingest them, they can't digest them. Those little tiny shells actually tear up their insides and they die. So that's a natural pest control. You can make natural pest sprays using soaps and vinegars, and some people use chili powder, things like that. I kind of stick to trying to make sure the soil's healthy, the plants are healthy. We have plenty of diversity. We have our beautiful comfrey right there that is in bloom, providing a good habitat and some nectar for pollinators, and hopefully some other insects come. And we're just creating a good ecosystem. You know, we don't want to have too many of one thing. We want a diversity of it all. And we will have some pests that like to eat our vegetable plants, but hopefully within that diversity, it can keep it within balance. And as the environment changes through climate change and things like that, it's really going to test our ability to adapt and help nature stay within that balance in our little microcosm of our garden. We just lost a lot of purple martins this year. They are insectivores that live down by the pond. So they were lost because we had a cold snap. The climate affected them. So what is the chain reaction there? They eat a lot of insects. So how is that going to go down the chain in the Great Web? So we need to protect everything. The greenhouse at Stratford, it is absolutely beautiful, an amazing place to be. And it's always interesting. You can tell when a space has been gardened by someone who is just very in tune. You can just almost feel the love radiating off of these plants. So I absolutely love it. But a greenhouse is a great way to extend your season and to have food year-round. We grow a lot of winter greens and stuff all winter long. We grow specific varieties that will actually freeze, but when they freeze, the plant cells are not destroyed and they will quickly thaw out and keep growing then. So in the greenhouse, obviously the seasonal transitions from your winter crop to your spring summer crop happens very quickly. This greenhouse is insulated by 2 layers of plastic that go up and over. There's an air space in between that kind of traps the heat in here. The only thing heating this is solar energy. So it's a little different. The water conditions are very different than outside. You do get some condensation, especially in the winter, things like that. And as you know, it's always good to let things kind of dry out and then water again. You don't want to keep a constantly moist environment. You're just inviting blight and mold and fungus, which is a little more prevalent here in the greenhouse than outside. But this greenhouse obviously is a big if you're starting a farm or you have a farm, this is going to cost quite a bit of money. I don't know exactly. Farmer Jeff could give us better understanding of how much a structure like this costs. I do know for myself at my home, I have created small greenhouses using plastic. You can put rebar in along a raised bed, some rebar, a piece of PVC pipe, and simply throw some plastic over. And that will extend your season for a couple months, depending on the weather. You can grow kales and lettuces and all kinds of things. Great place to get your early seeds started for spring. You can make a little cold frame using straw bales, 3 straw bales on one side, a couple pieces of I've used old windows and glass. Obviously, you want the glass facing the south side so that sunlight comes in. But those straw bales act as a wonderful insulation for your plants into the cold season. And then you can buy, I was researching online, I was thinking about looking into getting a greenhouse kit, like a 10 by 20, a really good one that is not going to fall apart. I've had some I ordered online, like, oh, I'll get it's just a big kite in the wind. And so a really good one will probably be about a couple $1,000s, but there are many sources online for greenhouses. I wish there's one right here in Ohio. I want to say off the top of my head, KB something. They are in Morrow County. They do a wonderful job. But just research, and there are many options out there to extend your garden season. You're constantly trying to.
All right, so that was a video that we had put together with April Hoy. Like I said earlier, our educational director. She does a lot of amazing work in the gardens and the greenhouses and is very invested there at Stratford and at home. Our gardens are also very well managed by a lot of amazing volunteers and interns that all work pretty tirelessly to make sure that we continue to produce good food out of those gardens. So we're going to go ahead and transition kind of to a Q&A. I'm going to start asking Jeff questions. If you guys had any questions throughout the video, or if you have any of your own questions from your garden at home that you want to ask, feel free to throw those in the live chat, and we'll take time to answer those as we continue through our time for the live stream. So the first question I had, and I wanted to ask Jeff, was about transitioning from a hobby garden to a production garden. So let's say I've been, hobby gardening for a few years now, and I want to go to the farmer's market and maybe continue growing beyond a farmer's market kind of setting. What are some tips you have to get started and start expanding my operation a little bit more?
Well, again, we throughout the series we talk about setting goals, and so you need to be clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And if you're a beginning gardener or farmer, if you're going to go to market, I would recommend sort of becoming an expert in a few crops instead of taking the route that a lot of CSA producers or market gardeners are going, where they try to be seasonal and available seasonally throughout the year. Now that's a great way to go. And if you don't have a lot of risk involved in what you're doing, and organic sort of affords that, sure, go whole hog. Transitioning, so if you sort of become a specialist in a crop, you can actually consume more of your garden, and like tomatoes, for instance.
Right.
They're a crop that can produce a big part of the season. And you can actually design your seeds and your varieties based on how they come through different times of the year. But crops like green beans, for instance, you can actually do multiple succession plantings of that crop and become like the green bean specialist of your local farmer's market. And you can mix that up by doing other types of beans. And it's interesting how a lot of, when you stay within a family or a sort of crop type, beans, for instance, if you become good at beans, you can grow a variety of beans. And this is true of tomatoes and also peppers.
Right.
So the transition to market gardening can take a lot of different paths based on your goals.
Sure.
But I'm not a big risk taker,
Mm-hmm.
and I would tend to be very calculated about how you move forward in that.
Sure. One of my initial experiences growing up was going to a farmer's market, and our specialty that we had decided was heirloom tomatoes. So we had all sorts of different varieties of heirloom tomatoes that we would bring, but we absolutely had a lot of other, vegetables that we would bring along with it. Another popular one for some reason at the farmer's market was kohlrabi. It seemed like we would sell out of it right away, and we would always have zucchinis and things like that were, pretty easy to grow alongside tomatoes. And so that's something to think about, like if you are interested in going to a farmer's market, for example, or just kind of expanding your operation a little bit. And then, like Jeff said, think about your goals. We had got into farmers markets, but it's kind of expensive to just pay to have a stand there. So if you're able to, have a market elsewhere, that is something to consider. If maybe your production isn't up enough to meet that like price point of how much you pay to be there and how much you get out of actually being there. So that's something to consider too, while you're, moving forward in your production.
Right, and it's helpful to be nimble through the season. Like that kohlrabi, for instance, it's a great year-round crop.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a fairly quick crop, relatively. So if you get good feedback on one crop, go ahead and start to specialize or expand into those types of crops. Certain crops, once you're like peppers and eggplant, Brussels sprouts,
right?
It's like a once-a-year commitment.
Yeah.
You don't get a chance to play it again.
Yeah.
It's a very long season crop, and but there's so many short season crops you can play with.
Right. So my next question actually has to do with transitioning from a conventional farmer to an organic farmer. So there may be, farmers out there that are thinking, I might be able to make a little bit more money if I, am able to market my product as organic. What are some tips you have for someone like that is, looking for that transition?
Well, if I was transitioning, I would first look for ground that I may own that hasn't been broke.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Typically, when you go from a conventional ground that's been plowed and fertilized, a variety of chemicals put in over the years, the soil life is it's a bit of a desert underneath the surface there. But that's not the case. A lot of farms actually have sort of fallow ground, or ground that hasn't been broken in a couple of years, or they get crop payments to not plant kind of thing.
Sure.
That would be the first ground I would break.
Okay.
Because Mother Nature actually has a very fast recovery time compared to what we've done to it in terms of destroying the biology in it.
Yes.
There's a reason I think it takes 5 years now to certify ground that was originally planted in chemicals.
Right.
And my experience in agroecology and soil research is that it takes about 3 years before the soil really starts to wake up.
Okay.
And it takes that 3 to 5 year period before you get all the sort of components that are interacting in the soil food web to really start producing the nutrients you need and the soil biota, the ecology, the biology, the organisms that are in there to really get the nutrients flowing.
Sure.
So if you don't have that option to break fresh ground, a great sort of eraser for ground is rye.
Okay.
Say you came out of a conventional corn year, and that spring right after, even though it may be late in the season, you can actually either drill or broadcast a rye crop. Some farmers even have the ability to broadcast that over a drying corn and get the crop started before they even harvest.
Okay.
And establish a rye cover on that field, and then you're basically left with leaving that ground alone until late spring, early summer.
Okay.
Some actually let it go all the way into summer when it starts to go to head, the rye crop. Rye has a great ability to sort of settle the system down and really start things working underneath the surface.
Right.
So a plow down of rye, I can't tell how many farmers I know that started using rye in their crop rotations. And one of the more common terms I've heard from farmers is that when they break ground into rye ground, it says it's like cutting butter.
Yeah.
It's just everything rolls and great tilth and things are starting to happen right away.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of organic matter, lots of roots. So.
All right. So you mentioned kind of like organic certification and how long that takes when transitioning. Can you speak a little bit to getting certified as an organic farmer, kind of that process? And I know that we're at Stratford, we're no longer certified. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, and it's important. It's a distinction to make, especially if organic is important to you as a label in terms of how you consume food.
Sure.
Certified organic is a very different beast from managing things organically.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are sensitive to the things that we put in our food, that should be a very strong question you ask when you go to a farmer's market. You should be looking for that logo
Mm-hmm.
from Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association,
Right.
and other certifiers, OCIA, that are in the region. For Ohio, it's oeffa.org,
Mm-hmm.
great organization, by the way. They've been certifying here in Ohio in our region for a long time. Look for that label if certification is important. Now, what managing organically and certifying are two different things, like I said.
Right.
If you're going to certify, which I'm a big advocate of,
Mm-hmm.
You're basically looking at, like I said, a 5-year hold time from the last time you used a non-certifiable product in your ground. And it's a process that you have to have a lot of patience for.
Yeah.
You're actually, especially if you're starting fresh on ground that have been conventionally grown,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have some failures.
Sure.
Serious failures, because there's just not the nutrients there. Now, there are a lot of replacement types of fertilizers,
Mm-hmm.
and there are a lot of biological and organic pesticides and herbicides you can use, and OFA, again, is a very great organization to help you through that process. But a lot of those cost a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So again, relative to your goals, how fast you want to go,
Sure.
you can certainly front-end load it with a lot of money and a lot of inputs
Mm-hmm.
that are organically certified. Again, all the inputs have to be organically certified.
Sure.
Then you could have some good success in the first year, but
Mm-hmm.
not as good as you would have if you had waited 4 or 5 years. Of course, it can't be certified until after that 5-year period.
Right.
So money, cash flow.
Yeah.
Maybe you would just hit conventional markets. You don't claim any organic,
Mm-hmm.
process even at all. I mean, Stratford has to be very careful in terms of how we use that term.
Right.
Because it's serious business. People are sensitive to pesticides.
Right. So you mentioned kind of like how Stratford, uses their produce. One of our questions was like, what does Stratford do with our produce?
It's an interesting question. We don't, of course, we don't sell it as organic. We
Right.
can't. We're not certified.
Right.
But people have gotten to know how we grow.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to certify actually for 15, 20 years, something
Right.
like that. The biggest, our product, number one, is education.
Mm-hmm.
Food is a consequence of education,
Yeah.
which the kids and our volunteers and visitors participate in.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a 3-tiered system in how we move our product. Kids are number one. We got about 9,000 kids that come through annually, and we give them first dibs as part of their field trip or their program that they come in for to taste fresh, locally produced food. Second tier is people come and do pick your own. It's actually a covert way to get people engaged in their own food system.
Yeah.
And we'll actually go out and show them where it is, what it looks like, let them taste it, show them how to harvest it, weigh it, and they can pay us.
Yeah.
And our third tier is that whatever we produce as a consequence of our program, we donate to a local food bank, Delaware, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Another great organization we have a partnership with. So we're putting over about a ton of produce over there every year.
Yeah.
That we produce through that program.
All right. That's absolutely really awesome. I think, that's something that I was engaged with at while I was in high school. We had a school farm that we had kind of gotten started while I was in high school, and one of our main, byproducts of it was taking it to a food pantry rather than, trying to sell it, out in the front of the school or something. It was, helping families in need. And at the end of our season, we had gotten a letter from the food pantry that we were donating to that we had actually helped with like 1,000 families, our produce had gone to, which was really interesting.
It's very rewarding,
right.
And it's a great relationship to have. And as a nonprofit, we have a responsibility to the community to give back where we can, but to also to not compete with the local farmers who are trying to make a living
right.
Growing produce and farm products. We don't want to be, in competition as a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. For sure. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit back more towards the production side of things. So there's several different things we can talk about, whether that be like composting, mulching, and like watering, all these kinds of things, pest management. So I'm going to start, I guess, with using black plastic versus mulching. So I know on our farm we used a lot of black plastic, and so that was kind of our main weed control system. Whereas I know that I've seen at Stratford we pretty much exclusively mulch, and we use corn stalk as our mulch. What do you kind of have to say about that?
Well, I mean, the downside of black plastic, even though it's certifiable,
right,
is that you are using a petrochemical byproduct,
right.
And you have to remove it every year, and then you have a disposal issue, a landfill issue. They do make a plastic that is biodegradable, but in a true sense, it's truly not biodegradable. It just breaks it down to small enough particles that we can't see it, so that polyvinyl chloride is actually, in the soil.
Right.
So that's one of the main reasons I got around it. The other thing is the soil plastic actually changes the microclimate under the plastic. It's very anaerobic. It tends to hold moisture a little bit too much. It tends to promote a lot of disease. One of the things I run into a lot when I see farms with black plastic is things like powdery mildew.
Okay.
Things that are a result of more anaerobic, stale, stagnant conditions.
Sure.
Okay. So with the beauty of using organic mulches is that it actually becomes like a lasagna sheet composting type system.
Yeah.
Where you can actually change up the kinds of mulches you use over the years to encourage different types of microbes and different sort of organisms within the soil community. So like one year you may use straw, next year you may come in and use corn stalk, next year you may use hay, say that got rained on a lot.
Sure.
We've used cardboard.
Yeah.
Paper products themselves is an interesting option because they actually now, instead of plastic, use long rolls and sheets of like a thick paper, which is almost like cardboard, that you can roll out like black plastic. You cover a lot of acreage and punch right through, and then it literally is decomposed by the end of the season.
Yeah.
And it holds the weeds back enough. So we use green mulches. We'll chop and get green grass that we have an excess of and just put it on.
Yeah.
Wood chips, compost. I mean, there's just so many things you can use from nature. Leaves,
Yeah.
So it's a great system in our mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I know one of kind of the last years when we had scaled back our garden just for more like personal consumption, we had used just like grass clippings.
Grass clippings.
Yeah, so you just put a bag on your mower and then you just use that. And it seemed to work pretty well.
Some of the most beautiful, successful organic gardens I've ever seen were strictly grass clipping based.
Wow.
And the only downside I've seen to it is if you get the grass clippings, fresh grass clippings, too deep, they start to heat up on you to the point they can actually kill the plant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you have to be careful about how much of a layer you put on at a time.
Sure.
But I have seen, and then what's underneath all those grass clippings over the years is just amazing. The worm structures and other sort of soil microarthropods that live under there. So it's rich. It's beautiful grass clippings. It's rich in nutrients that haven't been reached out yet.
Right.
Rich in nutrients. So.
All right. So we have a few questions I've noticed. So I'm going to kind of read through them, and we can think about kind of how we want to respond. So Diana says that she gardens as a hobby, and they compost and add that to their soil. They've noticed that their raspberries are struggling a little bit. The leaves are yellowing and some canes have dried up. So they've been encouraged to soil test, and there are a lot of different tests, so they're not sure where to start. What are kind of your recommendations there? I know that we've talked about soil testing before, but maybe for this situation, what do you recommend?
We grow a lot of brambles at Stratford, and we're seeing a lot of this. Typically, it's a form of chlorosis that's it's probably started with a starvation for nitrogen,
Okay.
and that's a consequence of climate change. The rain patterns we've had over the last 3 years. I've been farming and gardening for 40 plus years now, and I've never seen it like it's been these last couple of years.
Yeah.
So basically, what's happening is you're creating the climate has created an anaerobic environment.
Mm-hmm.
The plants are starving for air,
Mm-hmm.
which then creates a starvation for other nutrients and their availability within the soil system. Soil compaction, like if anyone witnessed the rain yesterday, it pounded the soil so hard it's just pushing those clay particles, which we have a lot of,
Right.
tighter and tighter and tighter over time, and then you get the drying and the saturation with water, and that cycle there flattens those particles out and makes it even more compacted and tighter.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can still get in between the canes, my first recommendation would be to break the soil up without getting too much into the crowns.
Okay.
If you have too many canes to do that,
Mm-hmm.
then your best thing is to take a good finished sort of weed seed free compost.
Okay.
Do it the best weeding you can,
Mm-hmm.
and put a nice thick layer of good finished compost in there. And over time, as the rains continue, the compost will actually shield it from further compaction.
Mm-hmm.
The organisms will start working underneath and start breaking the compaction underneath, and will start to mellow that soil out.
Sure.
A quick fix is to do a foliar spray of a good compost tea.
Okay. Yeah.
You could even go as far as saying a manure tea, because early season it is a chlorosis from a nitrogen deficiency.
Right.
And a foliar spray on brambles, I pretty much guarantee that you would see a difference within a week.
Yeah.
On how to use them.
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot of positive things about using foliar sprays. So yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider in this situation. Our next question is from David Hoy. He wants to know how the coronavirus has affected people's desire to garden. Do you have any insight on that?
I think it actually has enhanced our desire to garden.
For sure.
The coronavirus has made us feel very vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
very sort of exposed to the potential of food shortages.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens if the food supply lines actually dry up on us? Do we have the means to actually feed ourselves? And the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, in the day of the information age,
Mm-hmm.
we have a lot of opportunity for information that you get the novice gardener going.
Yeah.
So we have a major upsurge in interest in gardening, in food preservation, in growing perennials, and habitat maintenance, because wildlife, heaven forbid, even though it could be a good thing, that we would become a hunter-gatherer society.
Yeah.
But do we know how to do that if we had to? So it's an interesting concept and process to watch as we go through these sort of challenging times.
Sure. And I know that even I've seen, just going to the store and you're looking at seed packets, any vegetable is like sold out,
Yep.
and there's all sorts of flowers left, which normally would be kind of more bare in a normal year. But I feel like this year everyone wanted the vegetables and the herbs and things like that they can plant in their garden as they continue to feel susceptible with food chains that are falling apart. We're seeing that happen. So it's definitely something that has impacted our desire. I feel like everyone's desire to want to farm. I know that I had a lot of, just like experiencing some anxiety. I was like, oh no, I wish like I still had a farm, at home and things like that I didn't have access to that anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people have experienced that,
Yeah, we're not alone.
For sure. So we have another question from David. He wants to know about suburbia discarding tons of grass clippings in bags. Can you use these on an organic garden? If I'm assuming he's referring to if they've been sprayed, things like that, would that be something that's able to be used or no?
Typically not. I would tend to test that out first on sort of landscape plants. Here's the difference. The grass clippings with fertilizer, yes, you can probably get away with that. Potentially right after, if you've got grass clippings right after it was fertilized, you could create a spike in nitrogen and other nutrients that could actually burn the plants.
Sure.
The question mark is whether there's insecticide or an herbicide also applied with that.
Right.
And if that is the case, the question or the answer is no.
Yeah.
There potentially is a way to mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how healthy that is, but you could actually compost it.
Okay.
And Mother Nature, again, has the ability to really sort of dilute the effect of those chemicals and actually break them down to the point where they're not biocides anymore.
Okay.
Because all chemicals have sort of basic components that you can break them down.
Right.
So the answer is yes and no. And until you test it on a shrub that maybe you're not so in love with,
yeah.
Go ahead and put it around and see what happens.
Yeah.
But better solution would be to actually ask your lawn maintenance person, what did you use last?
Okay.
And are these grass clippings usable now? If you're maintaining your own lawn, you have total control.
Right.
And like I said, it's some of the best. It's free, first of all, and over a month period of time of weekly grass clippings.
Yeah.
You can mulch a pretty large area.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's cheaper than wood chip.
Yeah.
And easier to spread.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes left, but we have another question. If anybody else has questions, definitely get them in, and we'll work to answer those. So earlier you had mentioned, the most beautiful organic garden you've seen used grass clippings, and you had mentioned that making it too thick can be harmful to the plant. So someone, Renee Westermeyer, had asked, how thick should the grass clippings be?
I wouldn't do much more than 4 inches.
Okay.
3 to 4 inches.
Yeah.
You have enough surface area against the depth that you can keep it cool,
right.
Keep it from kicking. You kicking up in temperature. You get it. I mean, you can actually, again, do a test pile. If you make compost, next time you get a bag of grass clippings, just make a pile anywhere in your yard.
Yeah.
And you get up to 8, 9 inches. You can stick your hand in there. You can actually feel the heat of it after 24 hours.
Right.
And but 3 to 4.
Okay. All right. All right. We've got another question. So Diana asks, what is recommended after the plants have been harvested to do the soil? Just mulch or perhaps a cover crop? So like after we were finished harvesting, would you say to mulch or would you cover crop? I guess it kind of depends on the situation.
It does, but whenever possible, I'm pushing cover crops.
Absolutely, I would agree.
There's much more going on underneath that we don't see in addition to what's going on top, and that's what's feeding the soil food web. The soil food web actually transitions between the seasons and goes to different depths. So by basically you're basically feeding them for the winter season, up to a few feet. Those microbes are alive still, and if you get your cover crop in early enough, those roots are down there, helping to assist their maintenance during the winter months.
Sure.
And they will pay you back in the spring when they reemerge.
Right.
They'll actually reemerge, along the channels that the roots created to build the soil structure back.
Right.
Get you ready for the new season.
All right. What is a good cover crop for a garden?
I mean, rye is the perennial favorite. I prefer putting a rye with a legume.
Okay.
In recent years, a legume is a nitrogen fixing plant.
Right.
Has nitrogen fixing nodules, which again, once they senesce and go through their life cycle, they're returning nutrients back to the soil. So legumes that are rye are very compatible with, and the list is long, but typically a hairy vetch.
Okay.
Very beautiful plant.
Yeah.
Nice, beautiful purple flower. And then another favorite of mine recently is a crimson clover.
Yeah, I love the crimson clover. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we're good on questions. We have about 2 minutes left. So is there any kind of last tips, recommendations, advice that you give to someone getting into gardening as a hobby, as a production farm, anything like that you'd want to say to end it?
All right, well, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
All right. We haven't talked much about one of the biggest problems or discouragements of gardeners, which is weeds.
Right.
How to manage weeds.
Right.
And we did talk about mulching, which is very effective all by itself. And timing of that's important. But when's the best time to weed your garden?
I mean, you would want to before you plant, obviously, and then just continue to weed it throughout as your plants are coming up, things like that. It kind of depends on like that mulching and the black plastic and the methods you use there. But you kind of want to suppress the weeds before they get there.
Right. Yeah. You're pretty close.
Okay.
Close.
Okay.
The best time to weed is when you don't see them.
Okay.
If you notice, the best kept gardens are the ones that a gardener will go through with like a little claw type hoe, very shallow tillage. Probably once a week they can cover a large space in a very short amount of time. So basically, they're breaking that surface and they're killing the weeds that have already germinated that you don't see yet in what they call the white stage.
Okay.
And that disassociation of that white stage of that weed seed to the soil, just by that little shallow bit of tillage or cultivation, kills that weed and keeps your garden.
Wow, I did not know that.
So weed before you seed.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess is that your, do you have anything else you want to add? Are you happy with anything here?
Oh, well, if I got time to talk, I mean, why waste that? But no, it's, gardening is a wonderful avocation and a wonderful vocation. I'm doing it most of my life. I had no idea when my grandfather introduced it to me as a kid that would be something I would turn into a career. It was actually a very conscious decision to make something I considered a lifelong avocation, kind of vocation. I haven't looked back. So all of you wannabe gardeners and farmers out there, there's a great opportunity for a new way to interact with the soil, and the land, and the biology and the nature that supports and holds all of us together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. That definitely helps sum it up, I think. There were a ton of topics that we didn't even get to talk on. Like you had mentioned, we barely got to weeds. I don't even think we talked about pests at all. There's so much to uncover. But if you're able to, next week, we are going to go over introduction to machinery and kind of talk about things like that. And then the following week is pollinator week, actually. And so we're going to get to kind of uncover a little bit more about beekeeping and kind of the products that you can get from that. So thank you for tuning in this week, and thank you all for some, great questions, things like that. We're excited to be here and talk to you guys. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you.